Hello, America. Welcome to the Junto Podcast, where we promote the practical applications of critical thinking and bold creativity. I am your host, Edgar Mills. Thanks for joining us. So, have you ever, during the course of a conversation, said perception is reality? Maybe. I probably have before. Have you ever said, I'm living my truth? Now, I can tell you I've never said that, but what we're going to explore today, good people, is the philosophical sort of foundations of these two phrases that I just said. And then we're going to kind of juxtapose these two phrases and see where they fit in and society and what they mean to different people. So we'll break these concepts down. We're going to talk a lot about some philosophers, right? The origins of these foundations. I feel like a lot of things we talk about and today with, whoever, a lot of things we read today even, they say these things that have deep roots, but most people don't know the roots of these things. So the overall theme here is what people perceive can feel very real. They can feel very real, and they do affect how you think and act. But it may or may not be objectively true. Yeah, that's right. You may be believing, or you may feel a certain way, and it may not be founded in an objective reality. Now, that being said, we're not going to solve anything here today. This topic, well, especially if perception as reality or is reality, this has been up for debate for centuries, folks. Since before Plato. You know what I'm saying? We're talking about BC, 200, 400 something BC. So we'll go into all these things. Now, look, I've got pages of notes here. Understand, folks, I read a little bit here, but one of the reasons I like doing this podcast is that it forces me into some deep research. And I like that. That has kind of not taken the place of reading. Right now, on audiobooks, I happen to be reading Milton Friedman. No. What am I reading on audiobook? Audiobooks take time, folks. I do not have the time. I do not have the patience to sit and read. But I do put audiobooks on when I get in the car. Well, and I'm switching back and forth all the time between audiobooks and podcasts. But what I am reading right now is Ludwig von Mises, however you want to say that, Human Action, a treatise on economics. I've never been economically smart. I became more of a libertarian because of different things. Economics, yes, I like the foundation of the economics, but I want to dig deeper into why the libertarians believe the things they do about economics. And Ludwig von Mises is a damn good place to look. So that's where I'm at, folks. I just started reading it. I'm still in chapter 1. At any rate, I digress. Perception is reality, is it? Where did it come from? Who said it first? Now, some of you are going to be shocked and amazed and probably a little disappointed to discover who coined that phrase. Now, the concept has been around. But who coined the phrase, perception is reality? Yeah, it's pretty new, relatively speaking. It became popular in the 80s and 90s. Yeah, the 1980s and 90s. And it became popular via politics and business, but I'll tell you who said it. A guy named Lee Atwater, who was a political advisor for the Republicans. Yeah, and he said it during George Herbert Walker Bush's 1988 election campaign. Yeah, isn't that gross? And it meant, in his context, what he meant by it was that what voters believe from ads, campaign slogans, news, et cetera, what voters believe, their perception, is more important than verifiable facts in order to win votes. Yeah. How gross is that? Think about that for a minute. Political advisor to H.W. Bush. Now, I said that the phrase, right, is new. The idea has been around. So actually, as far back as probably, 400 BC, a Greek philosopher named Protagoras said that people decide what's true or not. Yeah. This means that truth depends on what you think, what you perceive. No one person necessarily has a lock on the truth. No one person invented a truth. That it evolves from ongoing, experiences of philosophy and psychology and all those things. So it's very loose, right? That the originator of that idea that there is no objective truth or objective reality, it's perception. It's what you think it is. So that goes back a long way, folks. But we'll get to it. And how did that proliferate through life, right? From back then, 410 or so BC till now. People usually link that to psychology or psychologists, but the term and the idea really took off really in the business world, marketing and branding, and these self-help gurus and stuff like that. And where they really try to, dig into the psychology of how to shape their perception. We know marketers and branders, they're not interested necessarily in selling reality. They're interested in figuring out how and why what makes people want something, what makes people want to do a thing, and then they just exploit it. So that's where that idea really, really took off. Marketing, branding, and that kind of thing, and then these self-help books and these self-help gurus and self-help camps and all these things, where they're not necessarily getting to the root of any problem or anything. They're just kind of soft shoeing it and letting your reality be what it is, and just whatever. You can tell by my tone probably that I don't necessarily agree with that. So what do we think? So we know where it came from and who said it first and kind of how it got around. What do we think it really means? Well, obviously perception is how you see things, and how you see things shapes, your priorities and your life choices and all those things, probably more so than hard facts. Everybody knows that if you put $100 a month in a Roth IRA, starting at the age of, 25, by the time you reach retirement age, you'll, with interest and everything, you'll have, I don't know, a couple $1,000,000 or something, 1 point something million bucks, most likely, given, typical returns and all. Those are hard facts. I mean, you can do math on that. That's a hard fact. Perception is, oh my God, I can't afford $100 extra a month. And then we go buy energy drinks and, dip and pouches and whatnot, and fat pills. So the term perception is reality. That doesn't mean to say that there's not a real world or no reality. There is. But what it does say is that your views kind of act like reality in everyday life. So the way you see a thing through your lens and your lens only, as far as you're concerned, that's the way it is. And that's so tempting to seem true. Yeah. So, but the very simple meaning of it is that perception is how your brain makes sense of what your senses take in, what your eyes and your ears, what you hear, is what it takes in. And if you think something's scary, then you'll act scared, even though it may not objectively be scary or dangerous. I can't remember the term right now. I've got a quote right on the tip of my tongue. I have no idea who said it, but we are, I have to come back to it. Sorry, I lost it. It's one of those things, man. Have it and I'll lose it. Let's see. I'll give you. So, I mean, for me, yes, sharks are objectively dangerous, but my parents took me to see Jaws at the drive-in theater when it came out when I was probably 7. Yeah, man. I've been scared of the ocean ever since, literally. And only a very probably I can count on my hand how many times I've been in the ocean deeper than my knee deep because of that. It's probably, my perception is, 20 feet away is a great white waiting to take a bite. So yeah, that's probably sharks. Yeah, they're objectively dangerous, but that's probably an irrational fear that I have. But my perception is that there's creatures under the ocean that could eat an entire, house. So I don't want any part of that. But as far as that term goes and the original use of that term, yeah, it was purely politics. And it's used a lot today in politics and media spin especially. But it's how they sway opinions and it's how they decide elections, not on facts, but on feelings. And we can look at this last election cycle and the 2020 election cycle. Oh my God, there's so many examples of that, but I don't want to make this a political thing here. Protagoras used a similar idea for arguments. So Protagoras was a teacher, right? We'll get to him, but he used this idea for arguments in ancient Greece, saying that truth changes based on the situation. But he also taught law and debating. Yeah, so you can see even from way back how lawyers and politicians were shady. In broader psychology, though, it kind of, perception creates these little mental shortcuts where we see kind of what we expect to see, right? We see what we expect to see. And you can kind of relate that to having a cognitive bias about things, or when you ask a question and you get the answer you want to hear, you drop it, right? It kind of works that way psychologically. In philosophy, though, it's like, how do we know what's real beyond our senses? How do we know what's real? Well, we'll get into that. So again, what is perception? It's how we take in information and how we think of it in our head, how we process the information in our head. And the fact of the matter is that it's a very personal thing. Our perception of anything, doesn't matter what it is, it's our own very personal perception. And it's subject to be wrong. With some people, it's very often wrong. With other people, it may or may not be wrong. It's based in feelings, though. It's based in emotion. Our senses take in the information. Our brain sorts it out based on what? Our brain sorts it out based on our past, our feelings, our culture, our daily habits, our cognitive biases, the things that we're sort of pre-programmed to think. We think those things sometimes, and that's how we have this. That's how we get to our perception of whatever it is we're talking about, and it affects everything, folks. It affects where you're at, what you expect, and your little shortcuts, your brain shortcuts. But I'll give you an example that will straight away prove that perception is fallible and apt to be wrong. And you can look at any number of optical illusion games or these paintings that are painted to give you an optical illusion. And your eyes will believe a thing. And your perception of what you're looking at, not only is it wrong, but some of these optical illusions, like, it changes based on, the angle you're looking at it or whatever, or how close and far you get away and things like that. So your perception, it's kind of delicate, right? It can change. So it isn't always right. It isn't always right at all. Your brain's telling a story that it's reading, but our brains are imperfect, folks. Our brains are vast. There's a lot of stuff going on in there that we haven't even accessed. So our perception can be wrong. Just take that and put it in your pocket. All right, let's look at some famous thinkers, philosophers who kind of echoed or agreed with the concept that perception shapes reality. And some of these, they theorize that reality depends on how we see it through our personal views and our own mind-made ideas, the things that we came up with. So I mentioned Protagoras earlier. He died 420 BC. He was a Greek philosopher, and he was a sophist, right? A sophisticate. he and a group of other teachers traveled around Greece teaching skills like public speaking, debate, and, then what they considered practical knowledge to be successful in public life, essentially grooming politicians and, lawyers, which is gross enough as it is. Now, if you're a I don't know many politicians, folks, but if you're a lawyer and you take offense at me saying you're greasy, I'm happy to debate with you. He taught people how to effectively argue and succeed in politics and law. That's it. How to effectively argue. Now, in modern day, how do politicians and lawyers succeed? Yeah, it's pretty gross. It's pretty gross. Now, I'm biased, but I can point to many, many, many examples of objective fact where lawyers and politicians lie. Protagoras said that man is a measure of all things, of the things that are, that they are, and of the things they are not, that they are not. Now, how cryptic is that? Can you win an argument with that? Yeah, sure. You sure can. Man, I hate to keep jamming on. I'm not going to keep jamming on lawyers. I'll stop. So Protagoras was one of the first philosophers to sort of posit this thing that we sort of create our own reality. Now, we'll get to different contexts later. All right, and fast forward to George Berkeley, who died he was around the 1700s. He was an Irish philosopher, and he was also a bishop. And he was a very influential thinker and known for the philosophy of idealism. And he said, now check, this is deep, folks. Be with me here. He said, to be is to be perceived. And and his thought was that things only exist if someone sees them, someone perceives them. If no one sees or thinks about a thing, that thing does not exist. Yeah. I think there's an old, if a tree falls in the woods, does anyone hear it? Sort of similar sort of thing. I think. Maybe not. Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? Things only exist if someone sees them. If no one sees or thinks of these things, they do not exist. Whew, that's pretty deep. There's probably a lot of ways to attack that. We could probably do a whole podcast on that statement alone. All right, then fast forward to the mid and late 1700s to a German philosopher named Immanuel Kant. K-A-N-T. So don't think I'm being foul language here. Immanuel Kant. I'm just going to say Kant. My southern accent. He argued that our minds shape how we see the world, which is very true. How we see things, how we perceive things, our mind does shape. But he split reality into two parts. Phenomena, which is what he says is the world as we perceive it, filtered through our minds, and then noumena, which is things in themselves that we don't have the capacity to truly know reality. Because no matter what we see, we're going to look at it through our own lens of perception. We see the world through our brain's filter, and any reality is hidden underneath all the things that we filter out. So that we don't even have the capacity to see reality. All right, and then one more. I'm doing four examples on these here, and then the one everybody knows, Friedrich Nietzsche. And he's always quoted. People quote Nietzsche all the time. He's got some profound stuff, and some of his stuff sounds really cool out of context and whatnot. But if you don't know Nietzsche, he was a German philosopher, a cultural critic, a poet, a writer, and he had very, very strong ideas that challenged what traditional beliefs about morality and religion and truth in general. And what he said was that there are no facts, only interpretations. And all these things sound like, you think of them, man, yeah, that's right. So what he says with that is that what we call the truth, really wholly depends on our perspective, shaped by our own biases and our own filters. And he believed that reality is absolutely subjective. So, because Nietzsche agreed, doesn't necessarily mean that you should. I'm just saying I happen to be on that side of the other side of the fence. So, who are some famous thinkers who disagreed with the concept that perception is reality? We know Immanuel Kant said there's two realities out there. But the guys we're about to look at, these guys said that there is a real world and that our senses can trick us, and that's why we need logic and proof and scientific method and things like that in order to get to the truth of the matter, whatever the matter is. Excuse me. So first, again, going back to the ancient times with Plato. Everybody knows Plato. He was around in the late 300. Well, from 428 to 348 BC is when his lifespan was. And Plato, a famous Greek philosopher, one of the most famous Greek philosophers, believed that the physical world we see and touch is like a shadow of a deeper, perfect reality. Now, that's kind of artistic, isn't it? Like a shadow of a deeper and perfect reality. And he thought our senses can trick us, making perception like unreliable, like our perception is probably wrong for finding truth. He thought and said and wrote and taught that we need logic and philosophy to discover the eternal objective truths in the world of forms. Yep. Now, he's a highly quoted philosopher. And one of his students, most famous, I imagine, Aristotle, who came along, he studied under Plato, I think, for 20 years. And he took over Plato's academy. And again, a Greek philosopher, a pupil of Plato. And he believed the reality exists in a physical world around us. And he said we learn about the world through observation and reason, using our senses as a starting point. And of course, right, how else are we gonna? Our senses are how we take in everything. Of course, that's the start point. And here's a little example, and it's a little out there. A tree's form, or its essence, exists within the tree itself. It's real, and not in some abstract realm. So we have to. How do we get to that? How do we discover that essence of that tree? Yeah, man, that's a tough one right there. But he believed that the physical world around us, there was a reality within that physical world. Aristotle, another famous one. All right, and now we're going to fast forward to the 1600s, the early 1600s. René Descartes, a French philosopher and a mathematician and scientist. Now, as soon as we start talking about mathematicians and scientists, we know that there's not a lot of that they believe in testing theories, right? There's a method to discovering truth. He argued our senses can deceive us, much like Plato did, and as if they were dreams or illusions. So they're not fully trustworthy. To find truth, we must use reason and clear thinking. Man, look at that. To find truth, we must use reason and clear thinking. He believed that objective reality, to include God, by the way, he believed in objective reality and God. And he said our perceptions mislead us unless they're checked by logic, right? Checks and balances. We have to use objective truth. We have to use logic and reason to check ourselves. Can't just run crazy with the way we think the world is. Don't trust your senses. They might be dreams. Use thinking to find sure truths, he said. Now, you may or may not know this. I didn't know this. René Descartes, this French philosopher, he said, cogito ergo sum. Any of you speak Latin? Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Yeah, we've all heard that one, right? Have you ever put any deep thought into that? I think, therefore I am. This means that the one thing that we can be absolutely certain of is our own existence. Because we have the capacity to think complex thoughts, by the way. Yeah. All right. Then finally, one of the definitely the most famous physicist, mathematician ever in history, but probably one of the most famous humans in history. Albert Einstein said that reality is merely an illusion, albeit a very persistent one. Yeah, he said reality is an illusion, but tongue in cheek, right? Albeit a very persistent one. Our perception of the world isn't the full truth at all. And he believed in an objective reality discoverable through science, right? He trusted science, methodology, experiments. He trusted math to reveal objective truths about the universe. And he rejected the idea that perception defines reality. It has to be tested. And look, I'm going to do another comparison here. Much like your tactics. You can do all the tactics you want to, but when you test it under stress with actual marksmanship standards, objective reality, do your tactics hold up? When you test your perception of reality against scientific method, does your perception hold up? Now, this last bit here, he contributed to quantum mechanics, and he was very skeptical of its randomness. And he said, and I love this one, God does not play dice. So of all these philosophers we've listened to, there's a few in there that explicitly we know believe in God. And can you prove God exists? Well, no, you can't. But guess what? Can you disprove God exists? We're going to get to infallibility here in a little bit. So what's my take on it? What do I think about it? Do I disagree with one and agree with the other? Well, look, yeah, I know I was kind of ripping on the perception is reality crowd a little bit, and that's true. But folks, it's very, very nuanced, especially in the modern age. It's a very nuanced gray area. Now, if there was a right answer, we wouldn't be having this podcast. There's still, like, some of the greatest minds to ever have existed have differing opinions on it. And I agree that our perception of things is mighty damn powerful. Some people can grab hold to an idea of their own making and put it in a death grip and hold on to it, man. And our perception definitely does guide the way we act. It guides the way we interact with humans and build relationships. And it guides the way we run society, to include our politicians and our social media and the things we see and hear on all the ads, on all the podcasts and TV shows and whatnot. And our brains, generally speaking, focus on what's useful to us and what confirms or helps us, but may not necessarily be true. Yeah. I disagree that perception is the whole reality. Facts exist, folks. There are plenty of objective facts. And I'll give you one just simplistic example. Gravity exists. It doesn't matter what you think of it. It doesn't matter if you think it's sexist or racist or homophobic. It doesn't matter. And there's nothing that matters. If you fall off of a 20-story building, you're going to fall to your death unless you're wearing a parachute, which is a whole nother set of physics that work for that, which is also fact, right? Most things we know about physics is factual. There is no perception. And if we ignore the facts, right, and we go based off feelings. Now, this is the same argument that men and women have or whatever is being rational versus emotional. But if we go just based off our perception and our feelings and our emotions, it causes problems. And we propagate false information as truth. There are so many people in the social media space today pushing false information as truth, or pushing out opinion or their perception as cold truth. And that's a problem, because now we're in a world to where we have to question literally every single thing. I want to say, I can't remember the CIA director from the 70s said that we'll know our program's working when everything the American public sees and reads is questioned. Yeah. Always got to throw politics in there, man. I'm sorry. This is a problem. And if you believe, I'll get on. I'll move on. We got to, we have to have our own checks and balances, folks. We have to have our own checks and balances. If you just blanket believe everything your favorite influencer puts out there or your favorite TV channel, you're probably, I can't put a percentage to it, but probably at least half the shit you're hearing is wrong. It's not objectively true. It's based on some kind of influence of people who have agendas and things like that. So we got to have our own set of checks and balances. We have to check our perceptions and the things that we're taking in against things we know to be objectively true. And we got to do that consistently, and often. We got to be consistent about our methodology, and we got to do it frequently to know the truth and to know reality. And I don't think that's incredibly difficult to do at all. And to be quite honest, I think the most successful people among us, they do that as a matter of just habit. You go through a critical thinking process when you take in new information, starting with who you're getting this information from. Yeah. So these people that misuse this philosophy, this facts don't matter, only what you think. I want to say that AOC, what's her name? I can't remember her first name. Anastasia Ocasio-Cortez, maybe something like that. She was once quoted saying that, "Damn, I wish I'd have thought of this when I was writing." Something to the effect of basically that your feelings are more important than objective truth. And that's madness. People twist it. They use it sometimes as an excuse for lies, or maybe not outright lies, but just to ignore some truths, especially in politics. Propaganda. We get propaganda from both sides of the aisle, 24/7, nonstop. Business, and I'm gonna say big pharma. Look, wherever you came, whatever side you came down on with this COVID thing, I mean, truth is slowly but surely coming out, right? Facts are starting to emerge, objective facts, real numbers of people that has been harmed by that. Yeah. The perception was that, oh my God, we're in the most dangerous pandemic ever. Millions are going to die if you don't do this, that, and the other. They hid the negative outcome. Well, they didn't even really properly test anything anyway. Hid all the negative outcomes and just touted positive benefits. And they didn't even really have to tout the positive. There were no positive benefits. And then almost everything short of making it mandatory. You couldn't work. You couldn't go places. You couldn't do things unless you had the shot and all this and that. That's a perfect example of how people use that concept of perception as reality to twist it for nefarious ends. And ultimately, what does this do? If you're an objective thinker, and I don't mean on any side of the aisle, I mean if you're just an objective thinker, this kind of behavior is going to break trust. If you're a rational, logical human, when these lies get exposed, it's gonna erode your trust. Yeah. Now, the only thing that's good is by knowing how people think and that they do believe in such a philosophy of perception as reality, at least gives you some insight and may help you understand their motives better, at least. But and I say we as all, we need critical thinking to mix our personal perceptions in with our with objective reality checks. Reality check. That used to be a catchphrase, I think in the 80s or 90s. Hey, let me give you a reality check, bud. Shit like that. Objective reality checks. We need them. Everybody needs them, folks. Everybody needs them. You can live in your own bubble. Well, we'll get to it. So In today's world, social media, man, it spreads views and opinions and philosophies like a pandemic, whether they're true or false or otherwise. It spreads fast, man. It spreads fast. And social media especially. Well, not especially, yeah, especially en masse. I think social media has touched more people than any newspaper ever has, or any television show or any radio show ever has. And when I say social media, that's a big thing. Like maybe no one show. Joe Rogan, I think, is probably the biggest, or possibly Sean Ryan, one of those two. Well, they're among the, they have 1 point something million followers. And that's not including people who get snippets of their shows on other social media outlets. Now, no time in history has someone like had that kind of reach to spread information. To spread information. Sometimes that creates echo chambers. Oftentimes it does. I think people who are, and no matter what you think about Rogan, I think he's a genuine dude. And I think he has, or feels as though he has a responsibility to put out objective truth. Now, he takes in a lot of perspectives. He's got a lot of different types of humans on his show. I think he feels a responsibility to put out, verifiable information, I guess. I would think. I do. I got like a few thousand folks listen to me. I feel an obligation to. Now, most of the things I put out's opinion. I kind of bat them off other things, history and philosophies and things like that. But I got a disclaimer. Yeah, it's all opinion. It's all opinion. Yeah. We need critical thinking, folks, to give ourselves a reality check. Social media spreads like wildfire, like a virus. I think there's responsibility. There used to be a responsibility among journalists, but all of the major outlets, folks, they're all bought and paid for. Whether it's the left or the right, they're all bought and paid for. And what does that mean? That means necessarily you're going to get the information that they want you to get. You're not going to get objective truth, folks. And if you don't believe that by now, oh, man, you've got to believe that. I reference Operation Mockingbird. I mean, come on. You got to believe it by now that the mainstream media, well, any media that's commercial media, is owned by someone with an agenda, left or right. And on social media, folks, you'll get trolls making comments and things like that. Or you might get somebody to ask sort of a pointed question that, maybe it's a respectful question and that'll get answered maybe. But you don't see a lot of anybody getting directly challenged, intellectually challenged. You know what I mean? You'll see people just put comments up, oh, this guy's full of shit, or this and that and the other. But true challenge, getting challenged intellectually. You don't see that on social media. You don't see it even on television. CNN will rip on Fox News and Fox News will rip on CNN, but I wouldn't call that being intellectually challenged at all. That's just rate baiting right there, I would say. Perceptions matter, folks. They do matter. But you got to be able to not juxtapose. You got to be able to, compare and contrast with hard facts. And this will give you a better, it'll help you make better and more sustainable choices. And that's where we're at, because the information we take in and how we synthesize it and analyze it, and then how it directs us to move in whatever direction. If we have some objective truth in there, we're going to move in better directions, and we're going to make more sustainable decisions about our future or our family or whatever. We all have our illusions. I have mine. But objective truth will cut through the illusion, folks. Objective truth And then what happens is your illusions, some people can call them dreams. And sometimes, you think you have this big, crazy, unattainable dream just based on your feelings, right? But what if you do some objective analysis, and then suddenly that dream, that illusion doesn't seem so far like, oh yeah, this can happen. It is possible. You know what I'm saying? So objective truth doesn't always crush your perceptions. It can reinforce them. It's not, you know what I'm saying? It's not necessarily good versus evil here, like you're right or wrong. It's that if you think in a critical way and you're honest with yourself and you make decisions based on, your feelings, right? I want to get this big range built. This has been a dream of mine since at least 2010. But if you start looking at objective truths, then you can start to see how is it possible? Can it happen? What needs to happen, right? And I want to use, let's see, who do I want to use the example of? I don't know if you guys know Robert Rodriguez. He's a director, right? And he made movies with, Tarantino. And if you guys ever saw his first movie, his first major movie, and I don't mean Hollywood major, it was called El Mariachi. I want to say, man, that dude had like a $70,000 budget. Something by Hollywood standards is minuscule. And it was the coolest movie, man. And the guy got wildly successful off it. And because he followed a dream, but he was pragmatic and he did things within the scope of his limitations. And not only did his limitations, through his limitations, some different and unique creativity came through his limitations. And he made one of the coolest movies ever. So, yeah, man, in his mind, I'm sure his perception was that, man, I'll never be able to make movies. But then he batted off some reality and he's like, look, I've got this much money. I've got this equipment. I can make it happen. That might not have been a good example, but El Mariachi was awesome anyway. Perceptions matter. You got to mix them with facts. You got to have both. All right. Now, those are my thoughts on perception versus reality, right? I talked about some of the philosophers that were on either side of that sort of philosophy. But now, this is a thing. I mentioned this in one of my podcasts. It's a catchphrase. And now I don't want to say disagree, man, because I was saying that about perception is reality. But I'm an open-minded enough person to see how both sides of it. I think living my truth, your truth. I'm living my truth. So in plain terms, that's about following your own beliefs and feelings, regardless if anybody agrees or disagrees or whatever, regardless of conventions or anything like that. And comparing it to perception as reality, right? There's living my truth and then there's perception as reality. Both of those concepts place the highest value on your personal views. But also, both of those concepts can and often do clash with objective facts. What does living my truth mean? And what's the roots of it? Well, living your own feelings and beliefs and who you believe you are inside, no matter who you are outside. Ignoring the rules, conventions, and opinions of other people, most especially, religion and things like that, is what we see these days. But it's about being real with yourself for your own personal happiness and maybe even inner strength, right? And that alone doesn't sound bad, does it? It's not bad. You should be who you want to be, right? But you may think it's semantics, but your truth doesn't mean objective truth. And I said this before. Nobody has a truth. Everyone has a circumstance. And now as we read, everyone has perceptions. But that doesn't make them true. So some of the philosophers, Nietzsche, obviously, he kind of believed by, making your own rules. And he was very critical of conventions and religion and things like that. And then there's a fellow from the 1900s, his name is Jean Paul Sartre, and he was a French philosopher and writer. And he was instrumental in developing the idea of existentialism. Now, we hear this on the news all the time these days about existential crisis and existential this, and it's an existential problem, blah, blah, blah. And when you hear politicians say it, it just takes all meaning away. But at any rate, he emphasized freedom, and I'm here for it. We're free to choose our path, and I'm all for it. But it's caveated with this. But we are also fully responsible for our decisions. And this responsibility, and this is what you see in existentialism a lot, and that we can make whatever decision we want, but we're responsible for those decisions. And that leads to angst or anxiety, because once you accept that, you got no one else to blame. And there's a lot of victims out there who want to blame people, everyone, anyone for their problems. But if you're being pure to this philosophy of existentialism and living your truth, you have to also accept the responsibility of your decisions. And from this is where we get the concept of authenticity, right? People who say they're living their truth, they want to be their authentic selves. They want to be true to their own choices, not society's expectations or your job's expectations or your church's expectations or anything like that. And then fast forward a few years, then we have Carl Rogers. He was an American psychologist, and he is he's one of the founders of the humanistic psychology. And I liken this to like sort of the self-help movement, And he's known for having like very client-centered like therapy approach, which emphasizes personal growth and understanding oneself. And hell, I use that sort of philosophy in Two Team Guys courses, right? It's all focused on leadership and team development, but yeah, also personal growth, right? And understanding yourself, why you do things and how things affect you and why you perceive things the way you do and how they bounce off of reality. And so his philosophy sort of encourages growth by matching your real self, your authentic self, with how you live your life. And I think we can even see that in like, say, the Christian community, for instance, or even military leadership, how matching yourself to how you live by example, lead by example, be who you say you are or who you believe you are. Yeah. So this is not horrible philosophy, but I think modern day folks and I'm going to even say, really young people they take these catchphrases and then they kind of twist them to match. I don't even think young people, everybody does that. Everybody does that. They take a catchphrase for some deep philosophy and then squeeze it into their own little personal philosophies. So how does living your truth? Oh, no, we're not there yet. So here's the thing about living your truth, right? It can be good. It can help a person feel free and liberated, but can also lead that same person to ignore or outright reject other people's beliefs, opinions, cultural norms. And I'm all for that, really. But it also can lead you to ignore like objective facts, right? Reality. So yeah, ultimately it can be liberating, but worst case scenario, it can also cause loneliness. It can cause conflict, either internal strife, or external. Maybe you're very abrasive or not very accepting of other people. And then also it can lead to kind of self-isolation And then even if you're self-isolating, you can kind of, in your own mind, perceive it as social oppression, when in reality, you're isolating yourself. Yeah. All right. So how does living your truth compare to perception as reality? Now, both of these philosophies, they both place the highest value on your own personal views, right? Your personal perception rules all. If you see something a certain way and it feels real to you and it guides you, and that's it. But the problem is they both even question, at a minimum, they question objective truth. But your own perceptions can twist facts through your feelings, right? Like an optical illusion. And your truth may be good. Your truth may support something good. If you're a young teenage Christian and you say, I'm living my truth, when you're walking the halls of your high school and you get ridiculed and things like that, but you stand firm, yeah, that's really a good thing, I think. But let's flip the script on that. What if you're a transsexual or like a boy who's gay and effeminate, and you're living your truth and you're walking the halls of your high school and you get brutalized every damn day? You know what I mean? So things like that shape the way we take in information, and it can further exacerbate that illusion, or it can, you can get away from that and liberate yourself. But you can't ignore the fact that other people don't share your truth. They might be assholes, but even if they're not picking on you or whatever, bullying you, and it's just some kid who doesn't speak to you because he don't share your truth. Yeah, both of these concepts, it's all about personal perception and personal views. It could be good, it could be bad, but generally speaking, ignores objective truth or objective reality. What's different about the two is perception is the concept of perception as reality. It's a little more practical in a sense that it affects more people usually. I mean, it can affect individuals, obviously, but like what candidate you choose, in an election cycle. You've taken in all the propaganda and you've parsed it out in your mind, and your perception is, oh, this guy's, yeah, I know they say this about him, but he seems really good. Never mind objective truth. Or even as mundane as choosing one restaurant over another. You perceive one restaurant might have the best food on the planet, but it's kind of run down. So your perception is that the food's probably shitty because it's run down, and you move on to another restaurant. I know that's simple. That's a simple example, but I'm just pointing that out because my wife and I go to a restaurant that's run down and kind of crappy looking, and it's awesome. Yeah, awesome food. Gondolas on Shorter Avenue. I'm just gonna go ahead and pimp it. They got pretty good food. So it's more of it's an external thing. Yeah, it's more of an external thing. Whereas living my truth is more of an individual, internal thing. It's individual, or to at least a small tribe identity. You know what I mean? Like let's say, I don't know, who's furries? You guys know what furries are? This is like semi-new stuff to me, man. But there's some bizarre folks out there, they dress up like little furry animals. That's got to be a very small community, right? And these people think they're living some kind of truth, like they're actually animals or something, I think. I don't know. I think it's some kind of sexual fetish. I'm not sure. But what I'm saying is the perception is reality is sort of a almost external thing, whereas living my truth is more of an individual internal thing. And you do it purposefully, right? To do what you want to do and be who you want to be. But I think at some point, some people even do it in protest of objective truth. And then not only that, but sometimes despite objective truth. Yeah, I think that. I said something about, I want to say in Seattle, Washington, on some government property there, they got like a statue of some like Moloch or some devil satanic, icon. Those people, living their truth, right? But out of spite, they fought to have this satanic icon put up on state property. Madness. So it's not always healthy. I mean, I think oftentimes it's not healthy, in fact. Excuse me. So when our views, when our perception, our truth doesn't match facts, one of the differences here is that perceptions can admit mistakes. And I'll go back to the optical illusion, right? We look at it and we see it, but we know, because it's a game or something, that we know that it's not what we're looking at. It changes. It's that, and you can make that right in your mind. Somehow, though, when it comes to deeper things, we can't make that right in our mind. But usually we can change our perception, right? Because sometimes it's only surface level. Like you can meet someone at like an industry event, name it, or a friend of a friend who your perception up front is like, man, this guy's an asshole. But then over time you interact a little bit and then you realize this guy's really cool. Your perception of this guy changed. Had nothing to do with your truth. Had to do with just the way you interact, and you learned truth. Your perception changed based on new information. Yeah. But then my truth, those folks, that can get combative. Yeah. That can get, people who are living their truth, and if you question it or don't fully support, I mean, sometimes, they'll see it as a personal attack. And I've talked about this plenty of times too. This all or nothing mentality where if you're not my ally, I don't mean if you tolerate me or even if you accept me for who I am, but if you don't fully ally with me, then they see it as a personal attack. And that's the difference there. That's how that can twist, because it's such an inner personal thing. So what's a fair way to look at these things? So looking back on Immanuel Kant, yeah, your truth empowers personal growth for your own consumption, but you are responsible and accountable for your decisions. But in shared life, right, all right, in society, in a functioning high trust society, it requires that you also, whatever your truth is, you also act, whatever your perceptions are, you also act based off of real facts, right? Off of objective facts. You can have your truth. You can have your perception. But for instance, the red light is the red light. If you run through that red light, the consequences of your actions may be that you get T-boned by somebody doing 80 miles per hour. There are objective facts and truths out there, right? So this concept of sort of moderation kind of plays here. Like you can have your own personal growth and you can feel the way you feel about a thing. But again, your truth is yours only. You're responsible and accountable, folks, for your own decisions. And then I'll go back to Plato, and he warns us, don't, and I love this. I love the way this shakes out here. Don't mistake shadows for the real thing. A lot of shadows out there, folks. A lot of shadows out there. Do not mistake shadows for the real thing. All right, we're going to look at some examples in today's society. Now, again, man, I'm not picking on transgender people. In fact, I'm just trying to make sense of everything, partly for myself, partly for you, partly to help everyone listening. I don't know, maybe strengthen your critical thought process a little bit, possibly. But gender, right? The whole transgender and gender transitioning stuff that we see in the news for the past, 5 or 6, 7 years here. In practice, for sure, transgender people live their truth. Absolutely. And they match their persona, their physical looks, their names, their pronouns, their sometimes even like social roles and business and whatnot with whatever their inner truth is. right? And this is where they do that, and we see them in society. Now, I'm going to say that there's probably maybe on the high end, the percentage of the U.S. population is transgender, somewhere like 1.3 or something. That's one of the stats that I found. So I think this is an outsized issue for the numbers of people that it affects, but the transgender community is among the loudest in America. Now, is that, we can examine why that is at another time. So they live their truth. Yeah, they live their truth. And they'll go, and they'll, to the extent to where they may get the medical procedure, they may go all the way, you know what I mean? Surgery and hormone therapy, the whole works. Now, I would argue that looking back in the long term, I don't think that that's been a wild success. I think, people who attribute the transgender, there's a pretty high suicide rate amongst transgender. And I don't think that's all, that community will say it's from bullying and from the prejudice and all that. I don't believe that. I believe a lot of that is from just ultimate realization that I've made a huge mistake. But for some, never mind the surgery, right? Just let's say just the social, I've taken on the opposite sex's name. I dress as the opposite sex. I've changed all my legal name and everything like that, and I'm working in a job that's typically reserved for the opposite sex, right? Let's say that. I think there probably are numbers that support that reduces stress from gender dysphoria that they feel, and it helps them to feel more authentic in their daily life. Yeah. It helps them to feel more authentic in their daily life. Now, there's a fact, and then there's a hard objective fact that by basic biological sex at the genetic level just simply can't be changed. And that's where the rub is with the general public. I think they, and some in that community completely reject any actual scientific objective facts whatsoever. Others understand where they're at and what they're doing and how it affects other people. So when you're in that ladder there where you understand how it affects other people, you understand where you're at, and you can balance your life. But some can't. Some don't have that. The idea of living my truth, they put their personal view and gender, identifying gender, they put it first above everything. And this guides their identity, it guides their actions, it guides the way they interact with other humans. And it's their reality, right? And they're trying to be perceived as whatever. Now, most people, I would say, can tell the difference one way or the other. Sometimes you can't. But still, there's a perception, though. Even though you know the difference, but still outwardly and superficially, you're like, oh, okay, whatever. But for them, that's very much their reality. Damn any scientific facts or social norms or anything else. It can be very empowering. It can be very empowering. And I think to the point that it's empowered a lot of that community to be so vocal. They can, based on these theories, build a more of a self-acceptance and build more of a sort of resilience against outside judgment. And it perfectly fits within the perception as reality by letting their inner feelings shape the way they see and move through the world, right? So for some, this leads to better mental health, and for others, suicide. I don't think there's a whole lot of middle ground there. And maybe I just don't know enough transgender people to know this, but I think I do. But obviously, for other people, this obviously raises a question about balancing personal truth and objective facts, right? Some biologists, a lot of feminists, they see this as ignoring unchangeable parts of a human, right? You cannot, a man, a trans woman, I think a man who wants to be a woman or believes that he's a woman will not have a baby. It's the way it is, not biologically. And so this causes bigger societal issues anyway. And then we have all kind of arguments and laws being passed over things like literal definitions of man or woman. One year, I don't know, Cosmo or somebody had Caitlyn Jenner as a woman of the year. Caitlyn Jenner, formerly Bruce Jenner, Olympian. So that's, and things like that is what asses the feminists up so bad. This conflict shows that how my truth, where it can bring personal happiness, it can create a vast divide between humans in society and culture. And it happens when one person's view affects shared realities. We have a shared reality no matter what. You share reality with other humans, whether you want to or not. And this is what ends up leading to talks about whether too much unchecked personal view stuff can weaken scientific fact and societal fabric. And then you get crazy laws being made, and you get people, I've got my own opinions. We're going to. So in action, as of August, so these views, right, as they are today, this month, 27 states have passed laws restricting gender-affirming care for minors. Now, I happen to believe that there should not be gender-affirming care for minors. I believe if you want to make those decisions, whether you think you're born that way or not, I believe age of majority is the age of majority. The parents should not be pushing kids one way or the other. Well, you shouldn't push for hormones and things like that, in my opinion. The Supreme Court has upheld a Tennessee ban on the treatments for people under 18. And then obviously states like California, Massachusetts have laws protecting access to care, gender-affirming care, from even allowing people from other states to come in there. So is that well thought out? Is that in good faith? No, it's not. And across America, this is a sticking point. And I believe it's purposely used as a political sticking point. Purposely. It creates sort of chaos across the country. But surveys show that most people agree that, and when I say most, I want to say something like 2/3 believe that trans athletes shouldn't be allowed to compete in whatever their chosen sport. It should be your birth sex. And then probably somewhere around 2/3 agree that there should be restrictions on youth transitioning things. And then there's always lawsuits. You got the ACLU, whatever, GLAAD, same friggin' usual suspects. And then you got other organizations trying to make sure that, well, they call it the Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine, which is, they're on the other side of the ACLU. They don't believe that gender transition, especially for minors, should be a thing. And these perceptions, folks, on both sides have shaped policy over the years. Yeah. Somewhere in the 70s, transgenderism was classified as a mental, gender dysphoria or something to that effect. Somewhere in the 70s, no, I mean, it had always been up until the 70s. And then the political activists pressured the doctor, and I can't remember his name right now, who under literal political pressure and the threat of, outing him as, or being targeted and losing his job and things. No new studies, no new science existed, and he edited the textbooks or the manual for, mental disorders and whatnot. to declassify that as a mental problem. So even if you're a transgender today and you're listening to this and you think, man, this guy's kind of a transphobe. I'm definitely not, but I want you to know, and you should look at objective truth and see that, yeah, it's there. Now, just because it's written in a book, does that mean it's so? We can argue about that too. But is there truly gender dysphoria there? Is that truly a psychological issue? Well, objectively, that was changed based on political pressure, not science. All right, enough of that. Man, I'm going to probably get some hate on that. Well, speaking of hate, I'm going to get some hate on this too. Now we're going to talk about crime statistics in the black community. Oh, man. I'm stepping in it, man. I'm stepping in it good. FBI data tells us that black Americans make up 13 or 14% of the U.S. population, but they're overrepresented in violent crime arrests. And they account for somewhere between 51 and 56% of homicide arrests or violent offenses in America. Yep. Those are objective numbers. So check it out before you jump up and start calling me racist and things like that. Also, those are objective numbers. Those are stats. Now I know that there's a book called Lying with Stats and things like that. I understand numbers can be manipulated, but even margin of error on these, that's still an outrageous ratio. It's still an outrage. And now I'm gonna say this, and I read this just the other day, unrelated to the research I was doing here. Of the black population that makes up 13 to 14% of America, the crime statistics, overwhelmingly, the crime is committed by black males between the ages of like 15 and 45. And then that number makes up about 4% of the population. So if you want to really get down to it, you got 4% of the population committing between 50 and 55% of the crime in America, violent crime in America. Now that's a problem. It is a problem. Now it's a complex problem, and I've talked about it before even, but let's compare it to perceptions, reality, and living our truth. Living my truth in the black community, the black community, generally speaking, the views crime stats through the lens of their experience, right? Their own experience and what they consider, and what is systematic injustice starting way back, like way back. I mean, we can go back to racism, but slavery, but let's scoot forward into the 1900s. All right. There was still a whole lot of residual from the slave days up through the end of the 1800s and then into the 1900s. But essentially slaves just, generally speaking, just became, low paid workers, labor. So basically you're still a slave anyway. Once they got freed as actual slaves, then they went and took their place next to the Irish as indentured servants. But yeah, racial profiling, economic. So talking about the current state of crime is a fact. It's an objective fact. But then living my truth is kind of almost like kind of trying to dodge responsibility and accountability for that. Now, living your personal truth, it can empower communities. And there are a lot of awesome community organizations, and I mean really grassroots ones, that are pushing for change and pushing for education and training and getting people sort of looking at things in a different way, changing their perception, right, of just the American life and ultimately the American dream. But yeah, there's a lot of emotion wrapped around that subject and a lot of history wrapped around it. And to some of these people living their truth, that emotion and that history matters more than the current crime statistics. Now, look, every morning in Atlanta, you hear about some little girl getting shot by a errant round from some not a gang shooting or whatever, just thugs doing thug stuff. Every morning there's somebody dead in Atlanta. And I got news for you folks, it ain't gun crime that's the problem, right? It's the culture, and it's the living my truth culture. Because when you listen to music that glorifies the ghetto and you live in the ghetto, you kind of are being encouraged to live that lifestyle. Kind of. That's what I think. If you don't think that, give me a call. So, but to the critics, right? Now, so living my truth, right? They're living their truth, and it's not very helpful to the crime statistics in their own neighborhood. Now, on the other side of that, you got sort of, I guess you could say conservative. I don't want to break it up into politics. White people who say that, and it's kind of a perception is reality thing for them. They look at the news, they see black people committing crime, they assume it's all black people committing crime. And it avoids dealing with, real critical thinking and looking at very specific culture and stuff like that. So they see the black community as avoiding personal responsibility, avoiding accountability, and perpetuating a ghetto culture. So this tension, but the racism that does now. Look, I don't think so much. There is racism, folks. I keep saying yes. I'm not telling you there's no racism, but I'm saying things like that. That's one of the biggest factors that continue, other than politicians. Okay, let me caveat by saying the crime statistics will be exploited by politicians on both sides of the aisle to push an agenda. They have no interest in seeing those crime statistics go away, either side. Understand that and believe that shit. The politicians have no interest in seeing those crime statistics and the divide that they cause. They have no interest in seeing that go away. So they're going to perpetuate it, and they're going to exploit the numbers. But living your truth, it's kind of a form of relativism. And living your truth, right? Being the champion of the ghetto and hating white people because white people enslaved your people 500 years ago. Now you're creating your own barriers that might block viable ally relationships, viable team solutions to helping to change the perceptions and to helping, create a better environment in what was purposely created as a ghetto, dependent on the state and things like that. So these subjective views, do they build empathy for your cause, or do they cause more division? I think they cause more division. I don't think that in modern day that there's any reason for a black neighborhood and white neighborhood to look any different in the modern day. But we've got so much history to fight through, to change, to overcome. Essentially, there's so much history, and some factions on either side don't care to change any of that. Chiefly the ones who benefit from it, and that's, I'll say, politicians, black and white, the rap industry. Yeah. The rap industry has no reason to change that dynamic, even though half of the rappers these days grew up in upper middle class neighborhoods, went to private schools and shit. I think these hardline views, these subjective my truth, my reality, my perception of reality, I think they don't build any empathy. They don't help to foster any teamwork or team building or getting any allies for your cause. I think they cause division on both sides. Throughout the past couple years, there's been a lot. Now, look, let me say this. Crime numbers are down in general. Crime numbers are down. there's a whole lot of community-based programs that help to bring in young black kids in these inner cities like Chicago and Baltimore and Atlanta and Philadelphia that are educating and training and giving these young people, something to look forward to. They're helping shape their perspective to be more positive. And yeah, crime rates are reflecting that. Now it doesn't seem like that because social media and because everything we see is such a friggin', all the news, they're going to exploit everything that happens. So we look at it on TV and on social media, we don't see it. But the fact of the matter is the crime is in fact down. And I've talked about this guy before, I'm going to talk about it again. Community movements like Black Guns Matter. And that's a fellow by the name of Maj Touré. And I want to say he's running in Philadelphia. I want to say he's going to be running for possibly city council. But I've watched that group grow and evolve, and they focus on education, training, shared experiences, experiential advocacy. They do events that emphasize personal impact. You know what I'm saying? Personal impact. And they also, I'm sure, now I've never sat in one of his classes, I'm sure he engages people with, or encourages people to get kind of proactive in the electoral efforts, especially at a local level. Maj, the guy I'm talking about, Maj, he is a libertarian. And libertarians, though, yeah, the big Libertarian Party, we always want to get people up on the national stage. But the reality is, I think the local efforts are more likely to get libertarians in office because they're closer down to the people. They're more grassroots. You can go out in your district and be known to people and make your platform known. But yeah, man, I think there's a lot of things affecting the crime rate going down. A lot of things affecting that. Now, public opinion. Now, some of these polls, you can call those objective truth, but some of these polls, man, they get a sample. They might be kind of skewed. It's like a small sample from certain play, whatever. So put whatever value you want in those. But even the polls that are coming out these days currently are showing some nuance in the thing. About 2/3 of the American people believe police treat black people less fairly by simply acknowledging systematic issues, acknowledging cognitive biases, etc. And acknowledging that kind of shit is very important, folks. But there's also support for more police funding. So there was this time period there where we want this defund the police, and liberals were pushing that. What is defunding the police going to do? Now, again, I have a love-hate relationship with the police. I think the police are misused. However, when you defund the police in places, let's say Portland, Oregon, or Seattle, Washington, chaos ensues. And that's not doing anything for anyone. It's not a positive move. But even in high crime areas, your average citizen that lives in these areas want to see more police presence. Yeah. And it's pretty equal divide, politically on that. So a lot of these cities, by the way, yeah, crime has gone down overall, but some of these cities that did all this defund the police junk, their crime, started getting like out of control. So they kind of they're starting to reverse stuff on that. So yeah, your perception versus reality. Your perception is, oh, police are bad. They're all racist thugs who are just looking to shoot black people. But then you defund the police, crime goes up. Yeah. So you got to balance some objective facts. You got to balance some objective reality with your perceptions. Man, I hope you guys didn't just hear that outro music. I forgot to mute it. I hope you didn't hear it. We're not over yet. I know this one's going a little long as well. All right. Now, let's go ahead. The last thing we're going to talk about, politics. I know. lies, lack of accountability, lack of transparency. Recently, members of Congress, they're facing some heavy scrutiny on alleged insider trading. They leverage non-public information, right? Privileged information, and that could be knowledge of programs that are going to be instituted or defunded or whatever, or regulations that are going to affect certain industries, policy changes, regulatory, just all these things. And then they make these bizarre, awesome stock trades that outpace even the most brilliant financial guys out there. That's amazing. How do they do that? How are these lawmakers so insightful as to what the market's going to do? Right? They should be making policy and working for the betterment of America, but instead it seems like they're just tracking the stock market all day, every day. Is that correct? Or do they have some kind of foot on the scale? Yeah, that's probably what it is. Some of these politicians believe they're entitled, like, oh yeah, it's just a perk for the job. And that's probably the way it's been looked at for many years. But it's shady. It's shady as hell. And it's bending truth to and misrepresenting their own intent to enrich themselves, to enrich others, to pad pockets, etc., etc. And I wrote here, whether intentional or not, it's intentional. You don't accidentally do insider trading. Yeah, they lie, and they manipulate, they distort facts to avoid, the public knowing about it. But in the age of the internet here, people know you can find out, and they're like, oh, it's innocent. No, is it Pelosi, her husband? I mean, that's what he does. That's what he does for a living. They're trying to manipulate your perception of what ethical conduct of a politician should be. Now, in the framework of living my truth, I guess maybe some of these politicians think that their insider trading is legitimate. Do you think that? Nah, I don't. And they think we're just not smart enough to understand the nuances that they're really allowed to do this, even though it seems like there's a conflict of interest there. But in reality, you just don't understand true integrity. That's what they're living their truth, right? They're smarter than you, and that's their truth. So yeah, I don't. So yeah, insider trading. They're dirty. They're greasy. They're liars. And I would say most all of them. Yeah, if you're insider trading as a politician, you're just a slimy, you're a slimy thief. You're a slimy thief, and you have no integrity. Your truth, whatever. Already, we probably understand that politicians feel like they are. They're in the ruling class. They're in the elite class. But any politician, save a few. No, understand. There's very few out there that are not don't fit this, but they lack any humility whatsoever. The hubris, the arrogance of these people, right? And they try to build this perception of they're up there doing such critical work that we underlings just cannot understand how the difficulties they go through. So they're entitled to these trades. Yeah, they're entitled. Right now, I think there are 10 members of Congress from either side of the aisle who are under probes, ethics probes from the Senate Ethics Committee and the Office of Congressional Ethics for insider trading. And worse yet, man, and like trading on health stocks. When they're up here doing things like making these vaccines mandatory and shit like that, and they're up here trading health stocks, or they're giving these gigantic contracts to, let's say, Palantir, and then they're trading in the tech stocks. It's so greasy. It's so greasy. All right. Moving on. All right. Perception versus reality and living my truth. Yeah, there's some good that can be found in that, right? Especially living your truth. You can build inner strength, inner resilience. And this can help these marginalized groups, sort of tell their stories, right? And that's good. There's nothing wrong with that. That's good. But what's bad? The downside of these living my truth and this perception as reality is they can and often do create these closed groups, these echo chambers. They create or propagate false information and cultural chaos. Something as simple as ignoring crime facts and then becoming an obstacle to help fix the problems, right? Or politicians who lie with impunity, bureaucratic appointees who just daily erode public trust. So yeah, the good side is you can build some inner strength. And the bad side is you can create tribes that can find no middle ground with other tribes. A great modern philosopher named Karl Popper pushed the idea of critical rationalism, and he opposed the concepts of perception as reality or living my truth. And he thought and believed that subjective beliefs have to be tested against empirical evidence to avoid deceiving not only others, but yourself, and to avoid dangerous ideologies. Empirical evidence, subjective beliefs batted off of empirical evidence to avoid negative, bad things, to avoid fooling yourself, folks. And that's why, and I always say this a lot on most of you got to be honest with yourself about whatever the situation, whatever topic we're on. I don't care if we're talking about pistol training. Be honest with yourself about your skill level and about how much you're willing to listen to someone else versus just do what you've been doing. When it comes to whatever your religious beliefs are, do you reject God because your dad beat you and you thought, well, there can't be a God because my dad beat me? Well, be honest with yourself. Not that you deserve the beating, but does one have anything to do with the other? Do you know what I'm saying? There's so much. So in Popper's philosophy, he talked about some falsifiability criterion. That's the cornerstone of modern science, is helping distinguish real science from pseudoscience, right? And let's use the example, evolution. Yeah, a lot of people believe in a blanket. They look at it like, I got to believe in God or I got to believe in evolution. Evolution is falsifiable. There are gaps in evolution as big as any gap in the biblical God and Jesus. All right, astrology is not falsifiable, right? There's hard science, there's numbers, there's math behind it. So falsifiability, if you can prove something false, then there you go. It's a perception and not a reality. All right, these are my final words, folks. I know it's going long. These are my final words, and I think this is the middle ground here. I believe your truth is great for you, right? But it is yours and yours only. You can't believe in your truth and not acknowledge that anyone else and everyone else can have their own truth too. And chances are their truth conflicts with yours. So if you believe in your truth and that your truth shouldn't be questioned, then how can you question other people's truth? Objective facts, folks, objective truth, objective reality is the middle ground. You have to acknowledge objective facts and truth for society to function harmoniously. We are a high trust society. We are a high trust society, in contrast to, say, Somalia. right? And in order to function harmoniously, which we see on the news every morning that there's crime. We just had a shooting here on last Friday at Emory University. I think 5 people were wounded, and the police officer was shot dead. And then the shooter, I think, shot himself. That is not harmonious. And that guy, the shooter, was out there executing his truth, right? He did not probably put a lot of thought into objective reality. And that's it. Our perceptions affect our lives, folks, but you have to honor the truth, because that's the place in the middle. That's the true north between personal and shared realities. Okay, folks, that was my thoughts on perception versus reality and living my truth. There was a lot there. I know it went kind of long, but I always say, oh yeah, this has been weighing on me. It wasn't necessarily weighing on me, but it was definitely something that I've been thinking about lately, because I've heard that multiple times. And yeah, I just thought I needed to speak on it. Now, there was nothing very controversial there. I don't think I hurt any feelings. If I did, hit me up and we can talk about anything you want to talk about. All right, good people. Please follow, the Junto Podcast 1727 on Instagram. Osprey Shooting Solutions on Instagram. Osprey Shooting on X. Robert Edgar Mills on Facebook. Two Team Guys on Instagram and Facebook. Come out and shoot. We got a pistol workshop coming up on 23 August. We have a wild card coming up on 30 August. And on 1 September, we have a pistol match coming up. Action pistol match. And we're going to give away a free course on that for the winner. Sometime in September, there's going to be a land navigation course, and that's a 3-day. It's going to be a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So more to follow on that when that gets scheduled. Hopefully in September. And just for other news, there's a fella out there named Michael Cursina, and he runs an organization called We Fight Monsters, and his podcast is Spotter Up. He and I are going to be recording an episode. I'm doing his podcast on 17 August. I don't know when it's going to air, but when that does, I'll put the link on the Junto. I'll put it on all the websites. Please follow, like, share, comment, and review. All those things that help the algorithms. I made the mistake, folks. There's a company out there called Path Social, and I paid an X amount of dollars to do a profile on there, and they're supposed to try to get you followers, right? Like genuine followers who follow the things that you do, the kinds of things, and it's been absolute garbage. So I went from something like 2,800 followers to something like 6,000 followers, and pretty quick. And every one of them over 2,800 they're garbage. They're bots or whatever it is. I'm not technically savvy enough to know, but they're not legitimate profiles. And I've long since canceled that Path Social thing, but you can only delete so many profiles a day from your followers. So I can't keep up deleting. It's out of control. So look, please, if you're a real human, please follow, right? The bots are no good. I'm trying to do good things for good people, folks, or anyone really. So yeah, please go check out the websites. OspreyShootingSolutions.com. It's where all the shooting happens. It's training. TwoTeamGuys.com is where all the adventure-based leadership development and team building happens. And those are on-demand courses. Those are you get 4 more humans who want to do a thing, and then we can get you on the schedule. And then the JuntoPodcast.com. Yes, the podcast can be found there, but the podcast can be found on all podcast platforms. But also on my website are blogs that I post up every so often. Sometimes if I'm feeling particularly creative about a subject, I'll write a paper because I think I use more colorful language when I write. And then if you are interested in writing a blog on a given topic, please reach out and send it. If it's semi well written, we'll post it up on the website and quite possibly talk about it on the podcast. Other than that, folks, thanks very much. Be good to each other. Think critically, folks, even about people you may or may not like or have some biases toward. Think critically. Think through. Bat your perception off of some objective truths. Okay? And then form your opinions. Do that. Meanwhile, again, be good to each other. Be safe. And I'll talk to you guys next time. Thank you very much for listening.